Brazil is one of the few countries that looks like a superpower on paper before you even understand how it works. It has more land than almost any country on Earth. It has over 200 million people. It has oil, iron ore, soybeans, beef, fresh water, huge farms, giant cities, aircraft manufacturing, deep culture, football mythology, rainforest, energy resources, and one of the most important environmental assets on the planet. If you were designing a future superpower from scratch, Brazil would look like cheating. And yet, Brazil has never fully become what it seems capable of becoming. That is the whole story. Brazil is not poor in the simple sense. It is one of the world's largest economies. São Paulo is a financial and industrial giant. Rio de Janeiro is one of the most recognizable cities on Earth. Brazilian agriculture feeds global markets. Petrobras is a major energy company. Embraer builds serious aircraft. The country has universities, banks, ports, farms, mines, startups, and cultural exports that travel everywhere, but Brazil also has violent inequality, weak infrastructure in many regions, political instability, corruption scandals, crime, chaotic cities, environmental destruction, and a constant feeling that the country is always close to becoming huge but never fully arrives. Brazil is the unfinished superpower. The first reason Brazil matters is food. The world does not only run on chips, oil, and money. It runs on calories. Countries need soy to feed animals, beef to feed consumers, sugar, coffee, corn, orange juice, poultry, grains, and land that can produce at scale. Brazil became one of the most important agricultural machines on Earth because it has the space, climate, technology, and farming culture to produce in quantities few countries can match. This is where Brazil's quiet power begins. A city in China, a supermarket in Europe, a chicken farm in the Middle East, or a food company in Asia can be connected to Brazilian land without the consumer ever thinking about it. The steak, the animal feed, the coffee, the sugar, the cooking oil, and the supply chain behind cheap food often lead back to Brazil. Brazil is not just exporting products. It is exporting calories, protein, and industrial agriculture to a world that keeps eating more. China is central to this. China needs enormous amounts of soybeans, beef, iron ore, and energy, and Brazil became one of its most important suppliers. This relationship gives Brazil influence, but it also creates dependence. When China buys, Brazil earns. If Chinese demand slows or shifts, Brazil feels it. That is the strange position of a commodity giant. You can be powerful and vulnerable at the same time. Brazil has what the world wants, but much of what it sells is still raw or semi-raw: soybeans, crude oil, iron ore, meat, and other physical resources. These exports bring money, but they do not always create the same deep industrial power as advanced manufacturing, software, or high-value technology. A country can sell mountains of raw material and still struggle to build the kind of economy where millions of people get rich through productivity. That is one of Brazil's traps. It is rich in things the world consumes, but not always rich in the systems that turn those things into broad national wealth. The second reason Brazil matters is nature. The Amazon is not just a forest inside Brazil. It is one of the central systems in the planet's climate, water, and biodiversity. It stores carbon, moves moisture, shapes rainfall, and contains life that science still barely understands. When people talk about the future of climate, Brazil is automatically in the conversation because so much of the Amazon is inside its borders. This gives Brazil a kind of environmental power no normal economy has. If Brazil protects the forest, the world benefits. If deforestation accelerates, the world pays. That means Brazil can walk into climate negotiations with something more valuable than promises. It is territory that matters to the entire planet. But this is also where the contradiction becomes brutal. The same land that gives Brazil environmental importance also creates economic temptation. Farmers want land, ranchers want pasture. Miners want resources, roads open new areas. Illegal groups take advantage of weak enforcement. Politicians argue about development, local communities need jobs. Indigenous people fight for survival. Foreign governments tell Brazil to protect the forest while their own countries became rich by destroying their own landscapes generations earlier. Brazil hears those lectures and says, "Why should we stay poor to protect your climate?" That argument is powerful, but it is also dangerous. Because if the Amazon is pushed too far, Brazil does not only hurt the world, it hurts itself. Rainfall patterns matter for agriculture, water systems matter for cities. Forest loss can damage the same farming machine that depends on stable climate and moisture. Brazil's environment is not separate from its economy. It is one of the foundations underneath it. This is the real tension. Brazil can feed the world partly because of natural systems that cannot be treated as infinite. The third reason Brazil matters is energy. Brazil is often imagined as rainforest and beaches, but it is also an oil country. Offshore oil reserves helped turn Petrobras into a major global energy player, and crude petroleum is one of Brazil's important exports. At the same time, Brazil has a very different energy profile from many countries because hydropower, biofuels, and renewables play a major role in its system. That makes Brazil interesting in the energy transition. It is not Saudi Arabia, built around oil. It is not Germany, trying to protect industrial power while transforming energy. It is not China, dominating solar manufacturing. Brazil sits in a more unusual position. It has fossil fuels, but it also has agricultural biofuel experience, huge renewable potential, and one of the cleanest electricity mixes among large economies. This should be an advantage, but again, Brazil's problem is not only having resources. It is turning advantages into national transformation. A country can have oil and still waste money. It can have green energy and still fail to industrialize. It can have hydropower and still suffer blackouts if planning is weak. Brazil's question is always the same: can it organize its strengths into a system that actually works for the whole country? The fourth reason Brazil matters is industry. People underestimate Brazil here. The country is not only farms and mines. Embraer is one of the most successful aircraft manufacturers outside the United States and Europe. Brazil has a serious banking sector, a large auto industry, steel, chemicals, food processing, fintech, energy companies, and one of the biggest consumer markets in the world. São Paulo is not a tropical postcard. It is a business machine. It is the place where Brazil's modern economy feels most concentrated. Finance, corporate headquarters, industry, services, media, universities, traffic, inequality, and ambition all stacked into one massive city. If Rio sells the image of Brazil, São Paulo runs a large part of the economy behind it. But Brazil never became an export manufacturing machine like China, South Korea, or Germany. It industrialized, but not deeply enough to dominate global production. High costs, bureaucracy, taxes, weak logistics, political swings, and protectionist habits held the country back. The phrase Brazil cost exists for a reason. Doing business can be harder and more expensive than the country's potential suggests. This is why Brazil frustrates investors. The market is huge. The resources are huge. The talent exists. The geography is powerful, but the system often makes everything slower than it should be. That is the Brazilian paradox in daily life. A country can have world-class agribusiness and broken roads near poor towns. It can build aircraft and still have neighborhoods without basic security. It can run advanced digital banking and still have people living far outside formal opportunity. It can host global events and still struggle with public services. It can be beautiful enough to sell dreams, then exhausting enough to make its own citizens cynical. Brazil's inequality is not just a statistic. It shapes the whole country. When rich and poor live in completely different realities, national potential becomes fragmented. One Brazil is connected to global finance, agribusiness, airports, private schools, gated communities, and international markets. Another Brazil fights for safety, transport, health, schools, and stable work. Those two Brazils occupy the same map, but not always the same future. Crime makes this worse. In parts of the country, violence changes how people live, where businesses invest, how families move, and how outsiders perceive Brazil. Security is not just a police issue, it is an economic issue. A country cannot fully unlock its potential if large parts of society live with fear as a normal condition. This is one reason Brazil's cultural power is so striking, because even with all of this, Brazil exports joy better than almost anyone. Football, samba, funk, carnival, beaches, bodies, rhythm, street culture, food, fashion, music, and the image of Rio make Brazil emotionally huge. The country has a cultural energy that cannot be manufactured by a tourism board. It feels alive, messy, seductive, and instantly recognizable. Brazil is one of the few countries whose image can travel without explanation. A football shirt, a carnival parade, a favela beat, a beach in Rio. The Christ statue above the city. The world understands the feeling immediately. That soft power matters. It gives Brazil visibility. It makes the country familiar. It creates emotional reach. But culture alone cannot solve the deeper problem. A country can be loved and still underperform. Brazil has often been admired from the outside while struggling to make life work for its own people at the level its resources should allow. That is what makes Brazil such a strong story. It is not a simple rise. It is not a simple failure. It is a giant country with everything needed for greatness, constantly fighting the weight of its own contradictions. The political story follows the same pattern. Brazil is a democracy, but a noisy and unstable one. It has survived military dictatorship, corruption scandals, impeachment crises, polarizing elections, and deep distrust in institutions. Politics often becomes a fight over whether the country should prioritize markets, social spending, environmental protection, agricultural expansion, state intervention, fiscal discipline, or national development. The argument never ends because Brazil is trying to be many things at once: a farm, superpower, an oil producer, a green leader, a social democracy, an emerging market giant, a cultural icon, a manufacturing country, a climate guardian, and a geopolitical voice for the global south. Each identity pulls the country in a different direction. This is why Brazil's foreign policy is interesting. It does not want to be simply pro-American or pro-Chinese. It wants room to maneuver. It trades heavily with China, talks to the United States, plays a major role in Latin America, participates in BRICS, and tries to present itself as a voice of developing countries that do not want to be ordered around by the West. That independence makes sense. Brazil is too big to behave like a small country. But being independent is not the same as being decisive. Brazil has influence, but it has not always converted that influence into leadership. It could be the natural leader of Latin America, one of the great climate powers, a food and energy giant, and a diplomatic bridge between rich and developing countries. Sometimes it plays that role. Other times it disappears into domestic chaos. Again, the pattern returns. The potential is obvious. The execution is uneven. The future of Brazil will depend on whether it can turn raw strength into organized capability. If it invests in infrastructure, protects enough of the Amazon, upgrades education, improves security, deepens industry, reduces bureaucracy, and uses agriculture and energy profits to build long-term productivity, Brazil could become one of the most important powers of the century. If it keeps relying too heavily on commodities, tolerating inequality, fighting endless political wars, and treating the environment like an infinite bank account, it will remain what it has been for decades, a country everyone expects to rise, but that never fully does. This is the emotional core of Brazil. It is not a country without greatness. It is a country overflowing with greatness in unfinished form. The world needs Brazil's food, the climate needs Brazil's forests, China needs Brazil's commodities. Investors want Brazil's market, tourists want Brazil's beauty. Football fans want Brazil's magic. Energy markets watch Brazil's oil. Environmentalists watch Brazil's land. Very few countries matter in so many different ways at once, but Brazil's biggest enemy is not a foreign rival. It is wasted potential. A country with this much land, talent, culture, food, energy, water, and global relevance should not feel permanently stuck between promise and disappointment. Yet that is exactly the tension that defines it. Brazil may never become a superpower in the clean, organized way people imagine. It may not look like America, China, or Germany. Its power may always be messier, greener, louder, more unequal, and more emotional, but the world cannot ignore it. Because the future will need food, energy, fresh water, climate stability, biodiversity, minerals, culture, and large democratic countries that can speak for the global South. Brazil has all of that. The question is whether Brazil can finally become more than potential, because if it does, it will not just be another rising economy. It will be the country that proves a rainforest nation, a food giant, an energy power, and a cultural icon can become one of the defining forces of the century, and if it fails, it may become the greatest missed opportunity on Earth.